After last week's discussion of an iconic musical, today we're traveling back to the realm of obscure flops. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I'm Tim, a theater critic based in New York, and I've been ranking every Kander Ebb musical based on listening to the original Broadway cast album. I already have videos about Flora the Red Menace and Cabaret on my channel, so go check those out if you haven't. As we turn our attention to John Kander and Fred Ebb's third musical to hit Broadway, 1968's The Happy Time. I had heard of this show, but I didn't know a single song from it. Everything that I did know about it came from reading William Goldman's The Season. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. Written by the screenwriter of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Princess Bride, The Season is a nonfiction work about every production that opened on Broadway in the 1967-68 season. It touches on every show that opened or tried to open, and it covers every aspect of the industry. As with all of Goldman's nonfiction books, it's one of the most entertaining, insidery looks at show business that you'll ever read. Having said that, Goldman draws his conclusions, yes, from interviews with the subjects, but also a great deal of his personal opinion, which he plainly relays as fact. It makes it at times a challenging read, like when he boldly declares Sandy Dennis was terrible in some play she was doing. Well, I wasn't there in 1967 to see it for myself, so I guess I'll take his word for it. And that's not even mentioning the wild chapter on homosexuals. But when you are discussing shows from 60 years ago, there often isn't a ton of information about it available, especially the creation of it, unless it was a mega hit like Cabaret. So it's to our tremendous benefit that The Happy Time was included in this book, and I will be referencing it. It's been a while since I've read the whole thing. I only revisited the chapter on The Happy Time for this video. But as far as I can remember, Goldman talks about Kander Ebb, but he never mentions that he knew Kander quite well. They wrote a musical together, pre-Ebb, 1962's A Family Affair. I find it odd that he omitted that from this book. The Happy Time is a memory play where photographer Jacques Bernard reflects on a pivotal moment in his life, a return visit he made to his hometown of Saint-Pierre, Canada, long after leaving it as a teenager to become a world-traveling photographer. His family, which includes his brothers and their wives and children, and his larger-than-life father, love him, but know that where Jacques goes, chaos ensues. Jacques' teenage nephew, Bibi, bonds with him and wants him to take him away from home, causing a rift in the family. Eventually, the father forces Jacques to admit to Bibi that his seemingly glamorous life is actually empty and devoid of meaningful relationships. Jacques also briefly rekindles a romance with his childhood sweetheart, the schoolteacher Laurie. Come along one wonderful day. The Happy Time premiered on Broadway at the Broadway Theater in January 1968 and closed in September of that year after playing 286 performances and 23 previews. So it lost money, but it did run for a little while, certainly longer than the 2 months Flora the Red Menace lasted. Robert Goulet starred as Jacques, the photographer. David Wayne was Jacques' father, and 16-year-old Mike Rupert was the nephew Bibi. The cast also included Julie Gregg as Laurie, and as less plot-relevant family members, Charles Durning and June Squibb. You can barely hear her on the album, but it's so cool that we can talk about somebody who's in a show in 1968 and just this past year. What a career she has had. David Merrick was the producer, Gower Champion the director and choreographer, and N. Richard Nash wrote the book, after the play by Samuel Taylor and the novel by Robert L. Fontaine. I'm not familiar with the original novel, nor the straight play adaptation of it, which was also adapted for a movie in the 50s. But according to Goldman, the musical version retains basically only the setting and the character names. In Goldman's telling, Merrick owned the rights to the property and approached Nash about making it a musical. Nash wasn't interested in The Happy Time, but he did have an idea for an original story for a musical. Merrick, eager to do something with the rights he had paid for, told Nash just to graft his story onto The Happy Time. The original was a young boy's coming-of-age journey. Nash essentially invented the character of Jacques and the photography angle. Beebe was the protagonist of the earlier incarnations. According to Goldman, Kander and Ebb wrote several songs on spec before Cabaret had premiered in November 1966. Merrick had wanted Cy Coleman and Dorothy Fields to write the songs, but they weren't interested and Kander and Ebb were hired. Goldman lays the blame for the show being a flop at the feet of Champion, the director, who Goldman says was the, quote, muscle or the decision maker of the production. Champion's biggest contribution was the idea that to have Jacques' photographs that he takes be visible to the audience, projected onto a large screen called a cyclorama. This was high-tech stuff for 1968, and it was expensive and difficult to achieve. Under Champion, the piece became a memory play set in Jacques' photography studios. The projected photographs would prompt Jacques' telling of the story of his return home to the audience, and necessary set pieces would come onto the stage via turntable. Goldman says, quote, "The projection simply overpowered the small size and feel of the show. It was as if a boy and a girl were put in front of a Cinerama screen. They would be dwarfed even when the Cinerama screen was blank. Put a picture on the screen and who'd look at the boy and girl?" Goldman also says that Robert Goulet was miscast as Jacques and that pretty much everyone involved felt that way except for Champion. That part required someone with, quote, mileage, and Goulet was too young to play that. Goldman also credits Champion with diluting Nash's themes and softening the character of Jacques. The way Nash originally conceived of it, Jacques would not merely be lying about the reason for his return to Saint-Pierre, he would be lying about everything. He was a fraud pretending to be a successful photographer. Champion thought that would make him too unlikable, so he changed it and also requested an epilogue be inserted where the present-day Jacques tells the audience that he did, in fact, start a family of his own. Clive Barnes, in his review in the New York Times, calls out this tacked-on happy ending while generally praising the show and calling Goulet, quote, splendid. Also, about this review, Barnes spends 2.5 paragraphs talking about how he was late to the show on opening night because his flight was delayed. The producers apparently held the curtain for 30 minutes and he still arrived 10 minutes after they started. And he still reviewed it. What a different world it was where they would hold the curtain because a particular critic was running late. But then again, this was the 60s when a New York Times review was make or break for a show. Walter Kerr in the same paper a few days later was less kind to The Happy Time. Champion has made use of projected slide film, slapping snapshots of quaint villagers all over a cyclorama that would have drowned a blow-up, he wrote, referencing the Antonioni film to which several critics compared the photography theme of The Happy Time. Kerr continues, "But here the technique creates a vast cavern, accenting the whole at the heart of things. It makes the stage inside it seem dark and gloomy. It pulls attention violently away from Robert Goulet when he is singing. It denies the play the one thing it must have if it is to evoke anything at all, the sense of a solid milieu, with rock underfoot and real smoke coming from chimneys." Of Kander and Ebb's work, Kerr said it was lacking that first twist of mind that led them into composing the brittle, sneaky score for Cabaret. They become more ordinary, though still musically interesting, when they are asked to supply upbeat tunes for filler. Despite the mixed reviews, the show won 3 Tony Awards: Goulet for Best Actor and Champion for Director and Choreography. Wayne, Rupert, and Greg were all also nominated. This is the third show we've talked about, and the third show that won a Tony for at least one of its performers, which speaks to Kander Ebb's great ability to write to the talents of specific performers. Although Goldman said Goulet was miscast, and that the writers thought so too, he got great notices and a Tony from the show, so I suppose the difference is that the people who weren't involved in this production didn't know of Nash's original intention. When I hit play on this album, I was prepared to find out why it was an obscure flop, and instead I fell in love with it. It's a beautiful score. Because I did not see the show, I cannot really argue with the general assessment, including by Kander Ebb, that the technology overwhelmed the show, but it's an argument that looks different from the perspective of 2026. People in 1968 didn't have much experience seeing shows with projections, but I do. I've seen shows with beautiful projections, I've seen shows with ugly, garish projections, I've seen shows with overused projections, underused projections, projections that mysteriously fly on a tiny screen for one scene and then vanish. I'm not sure I've ever walked out of a show saying that the projections were too big for the story. It's really about what you do with the projections, and the accounts of the happy time make them seem sparing and thematically relevant. They weren't used to represent signs or backdrops or other pieces of scenery that is so often lazily done nowadays, so I can't really get on board with that being the reason the show failed. Unless the argument is that because of the cyclorama, a larger stage was needed to house it, and that forced the show into the Broadway theater, which is admittedly a pretty large theater for a show like this. It strikes me how close Champion got to the future of musicals for all the criticism he gets for in the stories told about the show. Not only the projections either, there wasn't a curtain down when the audience was walking into the theater, which is done all the time today, but back then it was the subject of jokes. Also, in the Los Angeles tryout, the orchestra wasn't in the pit, which is something else that is done all the time now, but was an innovation back then. Does this show take for granted that people who find fulfillment in their career rather than having a wife and kids are inherently less happy than they could be? Yes it does. And that's obviously something I don't agree with, but it doesn't do it more than any movie you'd find on the Hallmark Channel. The material is almost in a Rodgers and Hammerstein vein, with its provincial setting and nostalgic point of view. And on the surface, Kander and Ebb's cynical and edgy reputation makes them seem a poor fit. But Nash's book and characters, even with the changes demanded by Champion, really temper any potential schmaltz, and the result is a bittersweet tone. The ending with Jacques going off alone is actually pretty sad, but it's framed as a necessary chapter for his personal growth. Kander and Ebb capture this tone well. It's not too light and it's not too dark. They inject a note of melancholy here and there. Take the song Walking Among My Yesterdays, where Ebb's lyric has nostalgia so palpable it's almost dewy, but Kander's music emphasizes the sadness. When Goulet reaches the word yesterdays, the music doesn't swell and build, it does the opposite, so that the singer almost has to toss off that word. I wouldn't exactly call myself a Robert Goulet fan. I've never listened to his records, but Lerner and Loewe's Camelot is one of my favorite musicals, and Goulet's songs on that cast album are some of my favorites. His voice is so robust in a way you just don't hear anymore. I'm sure a lot of modern listeners will think it's too much and that he's over-singing, but for me it works. That's actually what I want out of a Broadway sound. His big Act 2 duet with Julie Gregg, Seeing Things, is sweeping in that golden age way a song could be. Gregg displays a crisp, clear soprano that's absolutely beautiful. It's two vocal types that Kander and Ebb rarely wrote for. Neither female lead part in the two shows I've already covered required a soprano. It doesn't make the show feel current either today or to 1968. But the throwback musical quality is absolutely filtered through the lens of Kander and Ebb. Seeing Things isn't actually a love song, it's a breakup song. The moment Jock and Laurie realize they're simply incompatible due to their differing worldviews. Again, it's not a happy ending. The framing device of an older Jacques looking back on this visit goes a long way towards achieving this balance and making it a good fit for the songwriters. And that was Champion's suggestion. Elsewhere in the varied score are songs that are pure Kander and Ebb. The Life of the Party, the showstopper for Wayne's Grandpère, is really fun. I'm surprised it isn't done more often these days. It's the perfect showcase for a charismatic star, and Wayne definitely fits that bill. His other big number, A Certain Girl, which eventually includes all three generations, is another winner. If it doesn't move the story forward a ton, it at least does what a show tune ought to and entertains. I Don't Remember You, a song Jacques sings in Act 1 after re-encountering Laurie, is a prime example of one of Kander and Ebb's favorite genres of songs. Songs that mean the opposite of what they say. Is there a word for that? Jacques is willfully trying to avoid his memories of his youthful romance with Laurie, but as photos of Laurie appear on the cyclorama, the audience realizes this isn't true. He does remember. A poetic use of projections, that's a moment I would have loved to have seen on stage. He's Back, the second number in the show, describes the family's feelings about Jacques' reappearance, with every member joining the song one by one, overlapping each other. It's not the most brilliant lyric I've ever heard, but its structure is more sophisticated than required by the demands of this otherwise perfunctory number. The title song, which opens and closes the show, is well written, but it's not one that I find myself eager to re-listen to the way I am with The Life of the Party and Seeing Things. It exists in the framing device, with Goulet singing it directly to the audience, inviting us to remember the happy time, and perhaps that's the reason it feels inessential to me. I felt the same way about Winkleman and Cabaret, so maybe I just want something out of the opening number that's different from what Kander and Ebb do. That's worth keeping in mind as I listen to more and more of their shows. Not every number is a winner. Catch My Garter is a number for the chorus girls at the Vaudeville Theater, where BB's father works as music director. That sounds squarely within Kander and Ebb's wheelhouse. They love a vaudeville pastiche, but there's not a lot going on in this number. Aside from the risque lyrics, I'm sure there was a dance break. Like all cast albums from this era, the dance music is not included, and I'm sure it was worthwhile on stage. But on the album, it does nothing. It's not related to the main plot of the family, so it feels unnecessary. In that sense, I get why people say Champion was the wrong director for this material. Fresh off the massive success of Hello Dolly, Champion, of course, wanted to stage some dance numbers. That's what he excelled at. But chorus girls and a big production number weren't what this show needed, as it was, as has been said, ultimately an intimate show. On the other hand, maybe the show could have used more of that style. The Vaudeville Theater is only the setting for one scene, which feels like a missed opportunity for Kander and Ebb to play with that milieu. Of course, they would make up for it later in their career. It's also a short album, only 39 minutes long, and that's because none of the reprises are included. Also not included is the music for the ballet sequence in the second act. The fact that there was a ballet sequence at all surprised me. And that's another example of the show resembling a show from the 40s more than its contemporaries of the late 60s. My biggest complaint about this score is actually a song that's not here. The climax of the show is the scene where Grandpère forces Jacques to come clean about the truth of his life to Bibi. It's a sad scene, but it's a cathartic moment of honesty for the character and his emotional breakthrough. It's the crux of Nash's themes. But there's no song on this album that hints that this event took place. Kander Ebb wrote a song for the scene, but Champion cut it after the out-of-town tryout. For later productions, they wrote another song for the scene, but the version that premiered on Broadway has no attempt at musicalizing the most important scene of the show. And that's a serious flaw. I'm going to give Song of the Show to The Life of the Party because it's just that fun. I recognize that it's a problem that the best part of the show is what Walter Kerr referred to as filler, since it's not important to the themes, settings, or characters of the piece. But in the specific context of my experiencing these shows as albums and not plays, that matters less to me. Time to rank. I am somewhat tempted to put this straight to the top. I enjoyed it that much. But I acknowledge that part of my affection is the surprise of discovery, whereas I was pretty familiar with Cabaret before I began this series. And as tuneful as The Happy Time is, it's just not as ambitious or multifaceted as Cabaret. It's still far better than Flora the Red Menace. Number 2. Join me next time as we listen to Kander Ebb's second musical of 1968, an adaptation of a recent Oscar-winning film, Zorba.